conversation and the contributions from you all that are listening and watching. And the way we're going to do it, as per usual, is in a minute, my colleague Rob Johnson, who is the co-author of the report alongside Caitlin Rollison, is going to take us through some of the big findings and the big picture analysis from the report, including some of the recommendations. Take 10 or 15 minutes, use some slides. And then we're going to have a bit of a conversation with our fellow panelists. They are Ruth Cadbury, who's an MP, but for the purposes of today, she's also of the Transport Select Committee, and also Becky Fuller, who's the Assistant Director at the Urban Transport Group. And then Rob will join the panel as well. So we'll have a bit of a conversation. As always, you can post your comments, queries, questions using the Q&A function. You can put your own questions in there. You can use the thumbs up button to also then any other questions or comments from someone else that you particularly like. If you thumbs up, that will move it to the top and I will be able to have a look at that. And we will be trying to feed in questions and comments along the way. There are specific methodological or background understanding issues that you want to get a handle on. You're probably best placed looking at the report in the first instance, which you can get on our website, centreforcities.org, and probably emailing or contacting Rob or Caitlin after the fact. If you put very complicated and technical questions or comments in there, it's not that I don't like them. I love those kinds of things, but we will deal with them outside of the event rather than inside it. So feel free to email or get in touch with Caitlin and Rob if you've got specific questions on specific issues. But I encourage you to put your queries and questions more generally. So that's how we'll do it, and we'll be done, as always, by 2 o'clock. So, Rob, take us through the big picture findings and implications of the report.
Thank you, Andrew. I'll just share the slides. So I'll take you through the headlines of our report, Integrated Transport, the Size of the Prize for Mayors. So I just want to set up why we're thinking about this and talking about this now, specifically looking at integrated public transport in big cities outside the capital. So we know we've got a national mission of achieving growth in all parts of the country. Within this, there are sort of more local goals that mayors have to do with growth, but also sustainable travel goals. And this is all to tackle a big problem that we're all aware of, which is UK big cities outside of London lag national productivity, which is not the case if you look at other Western European and G7 countries. And to meet these lofty ambitions, you need the right tools to tackle them. And this is where integrated public transport in these places comes in. There's a whole pipeline of legislation that I won't go into the details of now, but this will allow mayors to unlock better powers to integrate transport systems. So we've seen just last week, the Bus Services Act allowed sort of speeding up the process of bus franchising for mayors, allow them to fill in their networks there. We've got the Devolution Bill going through Parliament, which brings a lot of powers under mayor's authority around local transport systems, particularly key road networks, which they'll have more control of. And we're expecting a railways bill in the near future, which will give mayors statutory roles over governing, managing, and improving their local rail networks. So that's the context. So we're thinking about integration in terms of public transport connectivity. So we're looking at connectivity to city centres where economic opportunities are concentrated. So in a sense, better connectivity increases these big cities' effective size by the number of people who can access these city centres. You can, if you're a policymaker, you can look at increasing effective size for 3 main levers. We've looked at, I guess, the more conventional ones in the past, which are you can simply make the network bigger. So expanding the network, new routes, you can bring people closer to the network, so through increasing housing density. What we're looking at now is integrating the existing network. That is making what you have now better, function better, more efficiently, making it easier to use, allow people to take longer, more complex journeys more quickly, more easily, and more cheaply. So within that, we looked at 3 specific steps mayors could take within these new powers to integrate their transport networks. That could involve increasing frequencies on key bus routes. So that's filling in the network, moves that maybe wouldn't be so possible under a more fragmented, deregulated provision of buses. And that can include things such as increasing reliability and punctuality, which would serve to have the same effect. That is, people who can access a turn up and go service to these places without need for forward planning, reducing uncertainty. Then there's also modal integration. So that is better linking modes between buses, trams, and trains, allowing people to make easy changes between them. That can be through single ticketing, through fare caps, or also linking up timetables to allow those interchanges. And then finally, this is mainly through increased powers over key roads. You can strategically reduce journey times on buses through public transport favoring measures such as bus stops or congestion calming measures. That's our framework. Let's get on to the, I'll tell you where we're looking at. It's the 6 city regions, 6 largest cities outside the capital in the UK, where mayors will have this established mayoral strategic authorities. This will give them the most powers over their transport systems. And this whole project involved tracking lots of buses. We use live data to better capture congestion, looking at rail timetables, matching with population and routing software, which you can all see in the report if you give it a read. But I'll take you to the headlines. So first off, we looked at what does a reasonable journey look like to the city centres of each city at present on non-integrated transport networks. And this is within 30-minute journeys. And as you can see, if on these networks, because changing is either requires multiple ticketing or is not so seamless, with existing frequencies where we don't include non-frequent services because that doesn't constitute a reliable journey at current bus speeds, what you see is actually these big cities are much smaller than what their population suggests. So that's comparing the yellow line there, the populations, to the connectivity, which are the purple bars. And it's not only that, but it means that these cities fall behind kind of European standards of connectivity if you compare them to the blue dots. We're seeing some places only sort of less than 30% of their population can access city centres within these reasonable journeys. So what would happen if you took steps towards integration? And you see each place would increase connectivity by more than a third in each place, about 40% across all places. This is through increasing bus frequencies on underserved routes. This is allowing trips, chaining buses, trams, and trains through better timetables and ticketing. And this is reducing journey times on buses stuck in traffic. And as you can see, that has pretty, widespread effects across all places. And if you add these all up, we get to our headline size of the prize for each mayor. And that is 1.2 million additionally better connected residents to city centres of the largest cities across the UK economy outside of London. Now, just to put that in another perspective, in population terms, that is like having another big city in the UK economy. Another big city, 1.5 times the size of Leeds, where all those residents are well connected to the greatest concentration of economic opportunities in their city centres. And these are additional effects. So, if you add those up with people who are already well connected, that is 4.3 million well connected residents in our largest cities outside of London. Now, I'll just take you through what that looks like in practice. So Sheffield serves as a good case study. You see there, the purple is, well-connected people at present on non-integrated networks, and then integration increases the reach by those green areas you see. And each step contributes to that. So if you increase bus frequencies on these underserved routes, you can see that filling in the gaps of certain suburbs where maybe services aren't so frequent now. You can look at the whole network and fill those gaps in. Integrating modes allows these kind of buses feeding more peripheral rail stations, so they kind of fan out of those stations because you're allowing those linked up journeys, making them easier for people, and reducing journey times allows the existing routes to reach further and get people into the city centre. Now, there are 3 steps here. You can do them in different combinations. We look at a lot of this in the report, looking step by step. Actually, a really good way to explore this is our data tool that we published alongside this. I've shown Manchester here, and here you can see all the options. You can basically be the mayor, take different steps, look at how that changes your connectivity, and where that connects. And yeah, I'd encourage you to play around with that and kind of see which steps have the most impact in each place. I think the main points to highlight there are that different steps obviously have different impacts in different places. So for instance, here, Manchester, it's actually, if you're taking a first step, you want to integrate your modes better. That is using the existing tram and rail networks and linking that up with buses. But actually, a lot of places such as Sheffield and other places like Leeds, bus frequencies is the biggest impact you can have. But let's get back to the overall prize. And it's not just people that this better connects, and not just in population terms. This will have economic impact and national economic impact. So by effectively increasing the size of these cities through better connected residents, we estimate that this could lead to additional economic impacts of about £17 billion per year across the 6 cities. And this is through, increased productivity, which we know happens through agglomeration when you increase the size of these cities. So this matters for mayors, obviously, but this also matters to the national economy. And, this is an important thing to emphasize. So I'm going to leave that number kind of hovering there while we go into, our broad recommendations for what needs to happen in order to make the most success of these powers of mayors looking to integrate their transport systems. So let's talk about national government first. They've already played a big role with allowing these powers in the first place, and giving mayors the means to integrate their public transport networks. Now, government should continue to support mayors because the road is kind of along ahead. It's still not done, and there's lots of steps to be taken before we can see the successes that we outline in the report. Now, this means being open to mayors' right to request further powers under the Devolution Bill. That can be, taking greater control of local commuter services and infrastructure. But we also think that because funding is such an important issue, that needs to be being open to greater local revenue raising powers. Now, the Transport for City Regions funding is welcome, and integrated settlements allow that to be done more flexibly. But having these local streams of revenues, such as, say, tourist taxes, which are, have been discussed more widely, or specific sort of payroll top-up taxes to fund local infrastructure, as you see in places in France, that this should be part of the conversations. Government still needs to deliver on rail devolution. We're awaiting that piece of legislation, and that will establish Great British Railways as the national operating body. Now, they will have to balance the interests of local, national, and freight, rail services. But within that, because we want them to work together with mayors within a flexible framework, because different mayors will have different capacities and different local infrastructure. And actually, I think an explicit aim there should be to, they should have a commitment to increase local powers over time and increase capacity should the mayors want it. And now we're also expecting the integrated national transport strategy. Now, because it's a national strategy, there is a chance there that the importance of place and these cities might be washed out with taking a national picture. But we want to emphasize that, the single most important places to get integrated transport for the national economy are these big cities. These are where, there's greatest potential for national economic impact, and the strategy should recognize this. And finally, to mayors, lots of these plans are underway already. They recognize the benefits of integrating their transport networks, and these things with the new powers will happen in the future, but it's about maximizing the impact of these plans. So that means focusing resources and where the biggest gains can be made. As we talked a bit about earlier, that's taking specific steps in different places. That is also recognizing that integration is the best short-term move they can make to improve public transport in their areas. And actually, longer term, more capital intensive projects such as network expansions, their impact will be multiplied if they happen within an integrated network. And then finally, mayors also have sustainable travel goals. improving public transport will be one, the carrot to encourage public transport ridership, but that also requires the stick of making cars less attractive. And as we know from the case of London, things like congestion charges or places like Nottingham with higher parking levies are part of this menu. And so mayors will have to make these tough choices if they are to make the best success of their plans for integrating transport. So that's all my presentations. I'd encourage you to read the report, have a play around with the data tool, and sort of take in the work that we've done. I'm happy to answer any questions, but I'll hand back to Andrew and the panel.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Rob. Good job on summarising quite a lot of information and being disciplined in not showing thousands of maps, all of which are in the report and available online. So well done to you. And just to say, we at the Centre for Cities, obviously we recognise that transport is used for many reasons by many different types of people to do many different things. We are primarily interested in transport and the transport system as a means to unlock and expand economic opportunity. So thinking about accessing jobs or skills or training or education opportunities. So that's why we end up doing what we do, and the way that we express it is because we're primarily interested in the transport system in that context, recognizing that there are many other contexts. And just to emphasize the point that Rob made towards the end, in some respects, what we're encouraging the mayors is to do what they said they were going to do, which many of them are, and for the government particularly not to get distracted or derailed, apologies for the pun, in terms of they have made the right decisions and identified some of the right priorities. It's now making sure that we continue along that, making progress along those kinds of things. So that's a bit of context for us as well. However, let's get the initial reactions from our additional two panelists. So Ruth, let's come to you. Hard yards. I mean, the Transport Select Committee is all about hard yards, making progress on transport. So be interested in your initial reflections on the report, and then obviously anything that you've heard from Rob today. Ruth.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much to Centre for Cities for inviting me today. I found that report and the presentation very, very interesting, and you explained the task in hand, but the opportunities in a really clear way. And those maps and that interactive data tool look to be incredibly useful. So, as many of those here at this event know, I chair the Transport Select Committee, which is one of Parliament's select committees. We hold the government, transport providers and the Department for Transport agencies to account for delivering on transport for the people and the businesses and the services of the UK. Naturally, we're UK wide, and I would say we cover all modes. Some of our reports are England only, and I'll mention a couple in a minute. But I'm an MP in West London, so I guess I've lived in West London for 40 years, so I can see, and my constituents can see, and I use the best of integrated transport system that we have in the UK. But I think you alluded to comparisons with how UK cities and city regions compare with other cities around the world, and you can see the task in hand. And I think even for London, and particularly some parts of London, are not well served by public transport, and certainly not in an integrated way. So I found this useful. We will be doing, we have launched an inquiry called Joined Up Journeys, because we were anticipating the government's strategy, and I'm just putting our website address on. I've just sent it to Centre for Cities, sorry, and that'll go on the chat in a mo, I believe. Yeah. So we've launched our inquiry. evidence, the deadline for evidence has now passed. So hopefully in the new year we will be having inquiry sessions on the topic of joined up journeys. Now, you will appreciate that, as I say, we don't just cover cities, and to some extent, for some of our work, we are encouraged by the way, and I'm sure you are, at how much this government, Labour government, focuses on devolution of powers and giving more roles and more recognition of leaders in our cities across the UK, particularly the Mayoral Combined Authorities. So that's good, but some of our inquiries, as I say, are far more geographically wide-ranging. I think for us, I think we're still wondering what the government means by integrated transport. I'm not sure what the definition is, and it means different things to different people.
Well, we've given them a definition, Ruth, haven't we? So they can just crack on. We can move on. They can go beyond that now.
Yeah, but coming from the perspective of the work we've done, our first report was was based on work actually done in the last Parliament by the Transport Committee called Access Denied: Rights versus Reality for People with Disabilities in the Transport System, and actually showed that unless you get it right for people with disabilities and different access needs, you don't. Even the best integrated transport system may not be integrated if it isn't inclusive. We've had a lot of interest in our buses report, and obviously the decline of rural buses has been the top of many MPs' agendas, and I know that also impacts on, as the presentation mentioned, the outer reaches of many of our conurbations. And if you live in a suburb of a large city or city region like Sheffield or Manchester, if the buses aren't regular, then you don't live in a city of integrated transport. And we, as you may have seen, in the press last week, we expressed our disappointment of the how few of our recommendations on enhanced buses, improving buses, have been taken up by the government. So hopefully that's of use to your members. The other area I think there's an opportunity, again, possibly out with the remit of this seminar today, but the new towns. And I'm pleased with the language that the government is encouraging. It is locating the new towns on the rail network, and that's excellent. But I think, just in conclusion from me, it's really good to see the work you're doing and how that links up with the government's aspiration of devolution to cities and city region leaders. I think the one question mark that and that maybe be picked up on, back in the day, being a London councillor, we were enthusiastically looking forward to the Transport for London being able to have a control over the suburban commuter rail network. A certain transport minister called Grayling pulled that one, and TfL and the Mayor of London is still hoping that we can go back to what that would have been, and you're also keen, and I know that the government and the city mayors and the mayoral authority mayors are talking to the government about rail. We must remember that freight also gets a look, and freight has to cross our cities on the rail network, and of course that'll be open access. So as Great British Rail develops, and I know that there will be discussions to be had, because there are tensions on our rail network. There just isn't enough capacity for everything and everyone that wants to use it, particularly if we're to get people out of their cars and also lorries off our roads and onto rail. And I hope that that's an aspiration for all, because I know that so many cities are plagued with congestion, with very, very low actual travel speeds on the roads.
Yes.
And unless you provide those alternatives, both say for freight and for passengers, you're not going to get that transition that we need. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Ruth. So quite a few comments and questions coming in. Rob, you'll be pleased to know that several questions or comments about are you going to do other places, more places? What about our place? Which means you might be doing something right. You can email Rob and he can tell you what our future plans may or may not be. So that's a good sign, Rob, that you're hitting something of interest to people. Becky, this is the sort of stuff that you think about every day, all day. So just give us your initial reflections and reactions to the report, how it fits into, you know, the way that you think about what's going on, and then we'll open it out for a bit of a conversation.
Thanks, Andrew, and thank you to you and Caitlin and Rob for inviting me to speak today. And thanks for developing this incredibly useful report and data tool focused on the big cities that form the foundation of our membership at UTG. We represent the UK's largest urban transport authorities. Our cities are the focal points for economic growth, attracting people, jobs and investment, but without that connectivity, as the report outlines, their productivity, ability to grow and build will always be capped, and that your report illustrates that very effectively when we compare the performance of our cities to their European counterparts. And it's a very useful analysis of where efforts can best be focused, and also the fact it's not one size fits all. There will be different things that work for different places. I like the approach of getting the basic nuts and bolts right first, using the tools that are increasingly at our disposal. I've now worked in transport for 17 years, and it feels like finally we're getting somewhere in getting many of the things that we've been calling for years and years and years. We've got the powers, increasingly the funding flexibility that our members really need to deliver truly integrated transport networks. So thanks to the Bus Services Act, all areas now can choose how best to develop their bus services depending on their local needs, whether that's full control of bus services as in Greater Manchester, lifting the ban on municipal bus companies, strengthening partnerships where that's the most appropriate solution. We've also got the greater funding certainty, certainly for capital, to invest in our networks. We've got integrated settlements coming online, which will bring together budgets from across policy areas into a single flexible pot. So we've got more freedom to choose where that investment's best targeted. And mayors are also looking forward to greater powers over planning, rail, roads, micromobility, through the Railways Bill and the English Devolution Bill as they make their way through Parliament. So, as you say in your report, the size of the prize, the scale of the opportunity is huge, and decision-making on local transport being transferred into the hands of those who know their places best just makes sense. But I suppose the caveat to all of that is it will take time. As of today, bus franchising is only operational in one area outside London. Devolution on rail is still a little bit of an unknown. It's still a work in progress, and the challenge will be to ensure that mayors' priorities really do hold weight for GBR as they try and balance all other the national kind of priorities too. And as sort of Ruth alluded to as well, you can join up journeys all you want, but people have to feel that they want to use public transport, walking and cycling, and feel it's for them. And that means they need to rely on it. I certainly factor in big buffers either side of any multimodal journey that I do, because I can't be sure that the bus that I'm hoping will connect to my train service will actually turn up on time. So people's real journey times are even longer than what might be suggested on the real-time information, because you're factoring in half an hour at the front to make sure you make those connections. Also, you know, we still have challenges to meet around ensuring the network's accessible at every journey stage. People with disabilities just don't have that assurance right now. Public transport needs to be affordable, and people need to feel it's the right choice for them, and it needs to be attractive compared to the alternatives. I thought it was really striking in your report that in some of our areas, even with all the integration improvements, many people would still be better off driving. Mm-hmm. So it just highlights the need for that carrot and stick approach. But key challenge, as always, is that's a very politically difficult thing to do. So yeah, those are my initial thoughts.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And you've already picked up on some of the some of the questions around modal shift and how we might think about that. And we're interested in, we'll come on to that. Rob, before we just get into a broader conversation, maybe we'll start, just allude to, are there any kind of immediate bits of response that you want to give based on what Becky and Ruth have said already, Rob?
I think so. Becky's point on the nuts and bolts is crucial, and I think that was my point earlier, where fixing the fundamentals will just unlock greater benefits for more capital intensive, more ambitious plans down the line. And I guess from the mayor's perspective, if they want to see real differences in their current term, then you've got these tools at your disposal, and fixing those things. And it's not like these are not. Maybe they're not the most headline grabbing things, but these are things that people in your areas will notice day to day. And I think your point about reliability, punctuality, etc., is a real key one. Ruth talked about it as well, where having that assurance that your bus will turn up on time, that you don't necessarily have to forward plan for your journeys, and you can get where you want to be at roughly the time you want to get to. It is a really key point, and I think it's just worth emphasizing that in our report we're looking at these what we term reasonable journeys, where we're not saying you literally can't make this journey within 30 minutes if you're outside the area, but it's just having those journeys as an easy option. And because it goes back to your point, Rebecca, that in many of these places, and I think particularly West Yorkshire and South Yorkshire come out on this, even with greater integration, about half of the people who are better connected by integration, they'd still find it significantly faster to drive. And so, on the one hand, if you just take integration in isolation, you're maybe halving the impact you could have. And so that's why you have to think about improvements, changes to your local transport networks in this kind of like strategic, whole piece view, where it might make those changes more palatable to voters if you say, look, we're improving our transport networks, and alongside that comes with changing road space and congestion charges and things like that, where we see, okay, there might be some political hurdles, but you see the benefits down the line. And as Ruth alluded to, often you don't see the when people look to examples, they seem to pass over London, but London is an example of successful integration in the UK that it's been making steady progress over the past 25 years, and you can see the real benefits to that. So I think all really important points brought up in this initial discussion.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Rob. Becky, start with you, and then Ruth come in as well. I mean, one of the reasons we did the report, not just to show the price, but actually because of the changes that have already been underway, legislative power changes, devolution, and the ones that are relatively imminent, the ability to to deliver it, to achieve it, is actually real rather than imagined. And obviously there are several bits of legislation that are at various stages. Buses Act now passed, Devolution Bill going through Parliament, Rail Bill on its way, etc., etc. Just with a sort of step back, Becky, just your kind of reflection on how none of it is going to be perfect. Perfection is not the ambition really, but just where will that leave us in terms of having the legislative capabilities to really make a significant step forward? You were sort of alluding to in your statements that that this will be a significant step forward. Just expand on that a little bit more, and I get Ruth to say something about how she thinks about this from a select committee point of view. Becky.
Yeah, we've made huge progress, and I think it's important to say that while it is still a work in progress in many areas, the mayors are already using their powers to deliver transport integration. You've got to look to Greater Manchester with the B network, and that is being driven by the mayor. It's still the first and only area outside London to bring buses back under public control after 40 years. That's enabled them to join up buses and trams. They're all yellow, they're all tap and go. There's no special card required, smart card ticket. It's just your bank card, your phone, your smartwatch, and you've got the comfort behind, the reassurance behind that of the daily and weekly fare caps, and you've got an easy to use app too that brings it all together. And we're already seeing the benefits of this devolution of powers to deliver transport integration. In GM, patronage on the buses has already increased by 14% year on year, and punctuality regularly tops 80% compared to 66% previously. So we're already seeing what that prize is. And the next step there will be to bring rail into the B network as well, and to have the largest active travel network in the UK is another ambition of the Mayor. So he's doing exactly what your report recommends. You know, the buses are getting better, they're more frequent. Now it's time to kind of build that in fully integrated network that integrates all the modes. And similar things happening elsewhere in our city regions. In Liverpool, they'll be next on the franchising journey. Then West Yorkshire with their Weaver network, which will bring together all the different modes too, including their new mass transit system. In South Yorkshire, you've got Sheffield's Supertram coming back into public ownership. So there's so many examples of what's already happening, and the challenge now is just to continue building the momentum and ensuring that our members are kind of set up for success, really.
Yeah, and in the current situation, and it's a moving feast, etc., moving position. Are there bits that you're more worried about, or you can observe noticeable gaps in the sort of legislative, enabling framework, or do you think that obviously there's detail to be decided, but it broadly does what it does? What's your sort of take on that?
I think the immediate gap that puts some of that at risk, I guess, is around funding. Whilst we have got greater funding certainty now, particularly from the capital side, revenue funding, particularly for bus, is still quite uncertain. We don't have that long-term certainty, and that recognises the ambition and commitment of the cities to transform bus networks. Progress in Greater Manchester was made possible by a secure revenue settlement that helped them during that transition to franchising, and it allowed them time to really design the network carefully, improve the quality, build public support as well. And I think without that similar certainty, other areas pursuing franchising as a way to better integrate transport will face challenges. They may have to scale back their ambitions. They may need to focus on protecting bus services rather than expanding them, or lowering fares or improving frequencies. So I feel like bus reform is a flagship government policy, and we need to ensure that those cities who are committed to delivering that are set up to succeed.
Or we'll come on into a bit more. Come back on the funding side, because I think there's been quite a lot of conversation in the chat and in the Q&A around that. So I'll definitely come back to you on that. But Ruth, when you're abreast of all the different bits of legislation, etc., or at least trying to be, you know what I mean? We all are to varying degrees. But I mean, just when are you broadly sort of happy that the comprehensiveness of the various bits of legislation underway or now enacted, do most, if not, they're not be perfect, but they do a fair amount of the job?
Obviously, we haven't seen the details of the government's integration strategy. The language is there, but sorry, I'm going to go back to buses. I along with Alex Mayer, we're pushing two quite anodyne amendments, or not anodyne, but quite specific amendments in the buses bill, to suggest that, first of all, there should be some aspiration for how the transport authorities might want to define in each of their own cases what they meant for an enhanced bus service, and then more specifically on socially necessary buses. That we suggested that that area should define define the criteria for a socially necessary bus service, and they were both sort of pushed back. And we're a bit concerned. I'm a bit concerned in the buses bill that an expectation of higher aspirations for bus services is not there. And obviously, Becky's absolutely right. There just isn't the funding for bus services, and they are. They must be central to what a city region's integrated transport network looks like. And we have quite a sort of treasury dominated way of funding public services in the UK. and so for instance, we went to Ireland on our visit for the buses inquiry, and in Ireland, virtually all of Ireland, which is a very rural geography, just about everywhere has to be linked to the nearest town or large village by at least 3 buses, return buses every day.
Nice.
That is an aspiration that they are delivering. In fact, they have delivered. Now, it kind of helps that their economy is in a slightly better state than ours and many other equivalent countries. So, you do need the money. But, there are other ways. Well, there isn't a public bus service in any country in the world that isn't subsidised.
Correct. And it's a very, very important point to make.
When you talk about
people miss it,
the low density areas and evening, night, and weekend services, and put it all together, almost by definition they have to be subsidised, and that's the elephant in the room that the debate around the buses and the buses bill hasn't achieved. And to be honest, devolution and powers to the mayors. So great that the mayors and hopefully other authorities will get those powers, but until we've worked out a way to funding it, we're going to be, talking about whether or not we can keep £3 bus fare, or whether or not we're going to have to cut this already pretty thin service even more. Brilliant. And going back to a point that was in the question about, we're talking about growth, but we've got to think about learning, earning, and leisure. Well, they're all part of growth, because if young people can't get to college and stay living at home because there are no buses to their college, now that they're no longer eligible for school buses, then they can't get on the first rung of the skills ladder. And they may need to also have an evening job at a pub or a hotel or something, and there's no buses. So, you've got that inbuilt inequality, which, even for cities, the edge of cities, that is a reality. And of course, the leisure is a key part of our economy. So to me, they're not separate things.
Yeah, no, right. Okay, so let's do funding question. Rob, in the report, we basically look at, we raise issues and questions about funding in sort of 3 ways, right? One, we're looking at the advantages of the integrated settlement approach, which is more of a flexible approach of using the money that you got or you get primarily, not exclusively, from government to do something. Then there's an issue, obviously, in relation to the fare box, and the fare box across modes. So not just one mode, but actually all modes, because that's, for example, how London funds its buses system. It funds it through the tube system primarily. So there's a cross mode fare box perspective. And then we also highlight, when you look at particularly cities and countries elsewhere, is they also have access to revenues from other things in order to then to play into transport. So just give us a picture on the funding question as we understand it. Yeah. And then I'll get Becky and Ruth, and then we'll have a question about the modal shift, which is, in what circumstances and in what ways can we think about getting people out of cars and into public transport as appropriate. So do a funding thing for us first of all.
Yeah, so Andrew set up sort of the different streams and different ways you can think about them. Integrated settlements are very welcome because you allow that flexibility across policy areas, but also across time, which I think is another important thing to emphasize. It's not just kind of single isolated year-on-year funding. There was the separate announcements of transport for city regions, which kind of unlocks a bit more funding, but through this kind of central government sort of grant focused system, which, okay, this is resource available to the mayors, and then our recommendations within that are to, use those resources where you see the maximum impact. And I think mentions of the West Yorkshire Metro earlier, those plans, I think we did a bit of modelling in the report, which looked at, actually, if you look at the connectivity impacts of that expansion, they could be tripled under an integrated transport network, because you can get that metro system sort of as the branch route into the city centre, and then the limb route into the city centre, and then you get all these branch kind of bus services feeding it. Now, this still leaves restrictions on funding and certainty and kind of longer term funding streams for mayors that they need to improve their transport networks. And this is why, we think, and this is part of our wider thinking on kind of increased power for mayors, is greater fiscal devolution is needed for mayors to be able to pursue, improving transport networks, but also wider infrastructure investment and, wider services in their areas. Now, this can come in many forms. So we've advocated for tourist taxes, specifically, a percentage fee on overnight visitor accommodation, because, transport is, as Ruth said, related to the economy, related to leisure and to, people visiting and spending in those local areas. We also, you can look at European models of raising revenues locally, specifically for infrastructure funding. And we see in France that they have these top-up taxes set locally, chosen locally in relation to local public transport infrastructure, which then goes on to fund their transport investment. And actually in places like Dijon, which I know is a big focus of the Integrated National Transport Strategy, but also places like Lille, you're seeing about 3/4 of their transport authority funding coming from these local sources. And so it seems to me, if you want mayors to have greater control over their local transport systems and have more certainty in that funding and unlocking more on top of what they already have and allowing them to deliver these programs going into the future, and through their powers of right to request greater services, they can build up a kind of head of pressure there and bring that conversation to national government, and then hopefully it can go forward from there.
Brilliant, great. Becky, so come in. So on the assumption, which I think is a reasonable one, that the funding settlement coming from government to the MCAs is never going to be enough to pay on the revenue side for all of this sort of stuff. And therefore, then you have to think about the fare box in the first instance, and then you obviously have to think about other sources. Just your thoughts on the funding, the funding question. How do we make progress on that? What would you like to see happen?
I would like to see a narrative change at national level in how we talk about funding and investing in transport. I think it's still very much transport is a cost that must be managed rather than an investment in achieving missions across government. We've shown in our recent reports how investment in transport delivers across all of this government's policy missions, but it doesn't tend to be framed like that in the discourse. This is a cost we need to go. Railways are expensive, but imagine if we didn't have our railway network, where would our cities be? We would be in a complete mess. So they deliver so much, they are worth investing in, and just changing that narrative to give mayors and local areas that covering fire, I suppose, when they eventually have to look at local revenue raising, potentially even congestion charging. Not that that's on the table at the moment, but it's something that might have to be looked at if we really are going to make public transport more attractive compared to using the car. But it's just not politically possible to call for anything like that at the moment, because you'd get torn apart for it. So yes, I agree with everything that Rob said. The next step for devolution really is giving the mayors ability to fund and to get on and build transport infrastructure, make those decisions locally. We shouldn't be going to the Secretary of State for little decisions that really are matters for local areas to decide, to speed things up, streamlining Transport Works Act orders, for example, looking at retaining business rates, land value capture, tax revenue devolution. All those things are things that we're going to have to look at so that we can build our financial sustainability as well and reduce our dependence on central government for funding. But as I say, we also need that covering fire from central government to say, yes, this is an investment. It shouldn't purely be seen as a cost to be managed and kept down.
Point. Ruth, what would you add to that?
Well, I think Becky put it perfectly. Transport is a means to an end, not an end in itself. And it is the oil that gets the country moving. And one easy way to get the point over is if you had if you didn't have the public transport system that we had in London, the city would grind to a halt. A massive city, a world city, would grind to a halt within minutes. and sometimes it does when things fall over for whatever reason. And then we are hamstrung in this country by the way the Treasury sort of sees everything as a cost, and the Exchequer is, taking the income in, rather than seeing public infrastructure, of which I'd include public transport, as an investment that gets a return on other bits of the balance sheet and other bits of the accounting, rather than a very simple hamstrung way. But we suffer from that in so many ways. The fact that we're so slow in picking up land value tax, which other countries are doing far more on. We had dipped our toe in the water on the Elizabeth line with Sill, but we're a long way behind on that. I also think, in terms of the public narrative, how that influences modal shift. Now, I'm lucky. I live in outer West London. I have all of the public transport options. I cycle and walk, and I have the use of a car. But actually, I find, even if it might take a bit longer, I'll go by bus or the commuter train, because I can get some work done. I can make a phone call. I can get some emails done, which I can't if I'm driving. I don't have to worry about where I'm going to park, or whether the parking app, what the mobile signal's like, because I can't be the only person who's had a parking fine because I couldn't get a mobile signal, and this is in London, to get the mobile app working. So getting people to shift their behaviour, and I fear that even our government is at risk of playing into the war on motorist narrative. And look at I don't know. Well, we obviously don't know what's going to happen at the budget, but up until now, freezing vehicle excise duty, but not having a lot to say on fare increases, and cost per journey is a real factor for many people's choice on how they're going to travel, or whether or not they're going to buy, continue to own a car or own a second car, or whatever. So that public narrative is still quite car bound, and I accept I have choices in London, but unless actually, sorry, I think the cities and the mayors in well away from London, as we start seeing I think we are starting to see a modal shift, particularly in Greater Manchester, and I think as that becomes more visible and is influencing more choices among more people well away from the capital, I think maybe people will start talking about the sort of influencers will start recognizing that there are other ways to travel than getting in the car and driving on.
Yeah, very good. Well, that sets it up. So we've got 5 minutes, or maybe just slightly less. Becky, so start us off and then bring Rob and Ruth in. So this modal shift question, even the analysis that we've done, Rob alluded to it in his comments and then in answers. Even if you improve it significantly to make the public transport offer materially better, there's still going to be a situation where in urban areas, the car is going to win out. Now, and we might just say that's just the way it is. But there's a kind of question about, if you want to get into modal shift questions, I'm interested in your balance between, yes, we need the public transport offer to be materially better than it currently is and be continually improving, etc. But just talk to me a little bit about the other side of the equation. How far do you think we should be going? How should we be thinking about making the use of the car, even at the margins, slightly less easy? Becky, what would be your kind of reflections on that?
Well, I think the problem the bus certainly suffers with is it is stuck in the same traffic as the car. So you can choose, if you are a driver, do I want to sit in my own little bubble with my music and my space and the people I choose to be with, or do I want to sit in the bus in the same traffic, stuck? So I think part of the answer is greater priority for public transport. I mean, tram's great on that because it doesn't get stuck in the traffic. It is convenient, it's comfortable. You just have to, and you can see yourself sailing past the traffic jam. Same if you go on the bike as well. You can see the convenience. You because you're sailing past the traffic and it's evident. So I think we need to look at how we allocate road space, how we prioritise public transport, walking and cycling. And as I was saying earlier, it's about looking at it holistically as well. We can't just look at one aspect. It's got to be available to people. You've got to be able to trust it and rely on it. It's got to be accessible. It's got to be affordable. And crucially, it's got to be an attractive option in comparison to the alternatives. But I think we just have to be a bit braver in how we make those decisions. But it's very difficult, as Ruth was saying, in the current climate where everybody's afraid to come out as, it's not about being anti-car. It's
of course.
The car has a role to play, an important role to play in many journeys, but it's part of a hierarchy, and that ideally public transport and active travel, we should be proud to say those should be the first choice for most everyday journeys.
Yeah. Okay. Ruth, bless you. Give you a chance to recover. I mean, just sort of very briefly, just on the sort of very crudely the sticks bit, as well as, we talk a lot about the carrot, understandably, but inevitably, not least, you're in London, right? There are sticks in place in London, and that's just the way it is. There are also, small sticks in places like Nottingham that has a workplace levy, etc. There are sticks in other countries. So they do exist, but we don't really deploy them. Should we do more of that? What's the committee's view?
Well, being a politician and the use of social media now, you would think that I was a mad car-hating cyclist who zoomed through red lights and everything. In fact, I don't ride a bike very often, but I can. I think that there is an onus on political leaders to get the messages out, but they have to be positive messages. The worst thing of all is people like me preaching to people whose lives are different to mine, and the choices are not as obvious. But I mean, for instance, in my borough in Hounslow, I think they implemented 30 school streets, didn't get a peek about them. You basically banned from you'll get fined if you go on certain streets at certain times at school drop off and pick up. No complaints about that at all, because the majority, and again, this is a London thing, and the vast majority of parents to our primary schools walk to school, because our catchment areas are quite small. So those who drive to school are very much the minority, and therefore there's a sort of social pressure there. So I think create the choices, advertise and promote the choices, but make it a positive, make the messaging positive, because I wasn't aware until we did the buses report quite how much pushback there was in, I think, Liverpool, maybe Manchester, about about bus lanes.
That's prioritisation, particularly Liverpool.
What?
They went bananas. Yeah, they went bananas.
We've had pushback on segregated cycle lanes in London, but not about bus lanes. So, and sometimes, and that was one of the few things Boris Johnson got right, by putting stuff in and trialling it, and then seeing how it worked, being a bit, he enabled our authorities to be brave. Some of them stayed in my borough, some of them didn't because they were very unpopular. So there is I think political leadership and saying the messages in the right way is important.
Brilliant. Okay, we've run out of time, but I mean, you see that in the report, Rob, right? We're trying to say improve the bus offer, but even still, particularly in urban areas, you need to think about encouraging people beyond in modal shift considerations, which takes you beyond just making the public transport better.
Exactly, yeah, and it's within that package, particularly with the road powers and prioritizing public transport. It's kind of doing the carrot, it's doing the stick as well. And I think the other thing to emphasize is these big cities have some of the lowest car ownership rates in the country, and particularly that's even higher in the most sort of deprived areas as well. So it's just thinking about who are you opening these opportunities up to, and who are you allowing to access them. But yeah, all really important points.
Great, thank you. Obviously, we could carry on, but we can't because we've run out of time. The fact that we've run out of time mid-conversation tells us it's a lively conversation. So a huge thank you to my panelists, Becky and to Ruth. Thank you for being with us. Obviously, huge thanks to Rob and for his presentation and participation. and along with Caitlin for leading the way on the report. As we said, you can get it on our website, centreforcities.org, not only the report, but the data tool and everything else. If you've got really tough, hard questions that you want to put, don't send them to me, send them to Rob or Caitlin. They'll answer them, particularly if you're interested in what else we might do in the future. But for now,